I was going to end my life 24 years ago, where I went, universe, you got 6 months. Either my life actually changes and I actually start getting happy, or I'm out of here. I found this thing called access consciousness. And in an hour and 15 minutes, I went from angry, depressed, and suicidal with a sense of no hope to a sense of the beauty of everything and the recognition it is okay, it always has been, and always will be.
Dr. Dain Heer is an internationally renowned author, speaker, and founder of Access Consciousness.
I am only as liberated as my darkest secrets, because it's my darkest secrets that rob me of my capacity for joy.
We call it darkness because of judgment, but these are all programs that we've learned. Everything that we've defined as our darkness is actually a refraction of our light. Consciousness is this beyond reality perspective that we have that consciousness gives you, which is where everything exists and nothing is judged. You're undoing the fixed point of view that makes you believe that this is the only choice you have.
As people expand their consciousness, the points of view shift. It's like the shields and the swords come down. What is the work that gets to be done so that our wisdom is not clouded by our wounding?
We have to allow ourselves to
Hey, it's Josh. Before we get into this episode, I have a small yet powerful favor to ask of you. The community has been growing by thousands lately, and the bigger the tribe, the bigger names of world-class guests we can have on this podcast that I can bring to you from my heart, from my curiosity, so you can have more wellness and wisdom in your life. Would you please be so kind as to hit the subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast? It'll allow us to rise naturally in the algorithms based on your 2-second act of generosity by you just tapping that little subscribe button wherever you're viewing or hearing this episode. Thank you so much. It means the world to me and our entire team here at Wellness and Wisdom. Now enjoy the podcast. Dain, welcome to the podcast. Been really excited to do this. Glad you're here.
Thanks, Josh. It is an honor and a pleasure. And I say that with a level of depth that I hope is received.
It's received. It's received. I was chatting with you when we first met, because we're literally just meeting for the first time. This is why I love podcasting. And you're wearing this beautiful shirt. So for those of y'all that are on Spotify or YouTube watching, there is this floral Hawaii shirt. And we were talking about consciousness within 30 seconds, which doesn't surprise me because you are the founder of Access Consciousness. What exactly is this service to the world? Not in depth, but on a high level. If somebody was floating in 30,000 feet in the sky, Dain, and they looked down and they saw you wielding this wand of love, really, that's what you're doing. And they tried to understand in a few sentences what access consciousness is and what this movement really represents. What is that for you, distilled down?
Basically, very simply, it is a way to live the miraculous life that you always knew should be available, that you haven't yet been able to access by accessing the consciousness that's already within you. And we have tools and a lot of ways of inviting people to their own knowing so that they can access that.
To their own knowing. It reminds me of a phrase maybe you and I have heard quite a bit. And this is what my hands are vibrating again, so I know it's a good sign. The knowing thyself concept, to know thyself. There's no greater gift in the world than to know who you are. But in order for us to know actually who we are, it's a process, man. It's a process to know thyself. You came from a very deep process. I mean, 20 years ago, your life looked totally different. Totally different. You were, I believe, a beginning chiropractor. You were in California. You were going through a spiritual journey. And it's easy for people to see you on YouTube and online now and go, wow, like it must have been so easy for him. Not the case. And not the case for most spiritual seekers. Like that's not our path. How would you describe your path of spiritual development and spiritual maturation?
Well, it's interesting because the way I used to look at myself, it's like when I was a kid, I experienced a lot of abuse and of every kind imaginable, from physical to sexual to emotional to you name it, I experienced it. And yet, even in the middle of that, I was like, it doesn't have to be this way. I knew, even as a little kid, I'm like, what is going on here? And so we could give any number of justifications, but the sense I got later was as a result of that, there were lots of choices I was making to live in a lot of wrongness of me. And I carried that into every aspect of my life, my relationships, my healing, my creation of business, my creation of money, my creation of very little happiness. And I remember when I was a little kid, my grandmother asked me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I went, "Happy." And she went, no, you're not understanding the question. And I was like, "Okay, what do you mean?" She said, "Well, do you want to be like a lawyer? Do you want to be an actor? Do you want to be a garbage man? What do you want to be?" I went, "Yes, happy," And that has been my point of view ever since I can remember. And what I noticed was in the moments where I was the happiest, that was when most of the abuse occurred. It was like, you're happy, somebody needs to take this away. And I never understood that until I started doing this work, and I started getting the awarenesses around that about how this sort of thing shows up. But so I got to a place where I was going to end my life 24 years ago. I was done because I'd been unhappy for the better part of 3 years, and nothing I did would change it. I was doing every spiritual everything that I could, attending weekend workshops, racking up my credit card. And what would happen is by the end of the workshop, I'd be like, "Yay, I found it. I get to be happy," And by Wednesday of the following week, it felt like everything was back in my world in the same way. The universe caved in on my head again. And it was one of those days where I went, "Universe, you got 6 months. Either my life actually changes and I actually start getting happy, or I'm out of here." And I thought, if you ever done one of these things where, little you is talking to big universe and you're like, "Rah," and I thought, I get to get out. What happened was, much to my surprise, I found this thing called Access Consciousness, and I ended up having a session of it. And in an hour and 15 minutes, I went from angry, depressed, and suicidal with a sense of no hope to a sense of the beauty of everything and the recognition it is okay, it always has been and always will be. And I remember looking at the clouds outside right after that session, and I was like, wow, has it always been this beautiful here and I just didn't notice? And guess what? Apparently so, because our point of view creates our reality. And unfortunately, we've learned that our judgments are what we rely on for our points of view. And that is not kind to any of us.
What do you think the difference is between judgment and discernment?
Not much in the way most people do it. See, I would like to make a distinction between judgment and awareness. See, one of the tools of access, and I'm a big fan of tools, because when I needed a shift in my world, I was using all the tools that were available. I'm one of those people that if you give me a tool, I use it. It's like, I'm willing to do the work. I just didn't see the result in the way that I had hoped or in the way that I knew should be possible. But with these tools I do, which is why I share them so dynamically. But one of them is, what's true for you always makes you lighter, and a lie always makes you heavier. And so if you notice that energy of judgment, it always creates a contraction and a sense of separation and a sense of, I'm standing out here and I'm determining what's right. And discernment is like judgment light. But if we look at awareness instead of judgment, what am I aware of here? What do I know? What can I choose here that I've never acknowledged? It takes it out of that, this is right and wrong, or there is right and wrong, and it expands it into, it takes it from digital and makes it more analog. It takes it from linear and takes it into more space, if you will, but more of a sense of lightness that it can have. So awareness, if we're willing, which, our tagline in Access is empowering you to know that you know, which is about knowing. That's a deceptively simple, very dynamic concept, where if we could even begin to acknowledge that we know far more than we can think, universes open up to us, because we function from a different space at the outset when looking at everything.
It's interesting. I was listening to you and I was watching, my computer was flickering for some reason while you were talking. And it's never done that before, like just quite like it is. So when you talk about the layers that really it takes to know thyself, and also you mentioned something really wise. You had said that it's not necessarily about discernment or judgment. It's about awareness. And with an increased awareness, the way I see it, I'm curious how you see it, there becomes this capacity. And I think whether it's my woman, my work, my life, my own joy, I am only as liberated as my darkest secrets, because it's my darkest secrets that rob me of my capacity for joy. And I wonder how you feel about that.
Oh, so dynamically. One of the things I repeat in the classes I facilitate over and over is the only thing you cannot change and make lighter is the thing that you have to keep hidden in secret, or the thing that you have to avoid looking at. Or when I say have to, this is a point of view that we take.
Yeah.
The only thing you can't change is what you keep hidden or secret, or the thing you avoid looking at. And some of the work that I've been doing lately with people is really dynamically around this area of what are you avoiding that you don't have to? Because we wouldn't avoid it unless we thought we had to for some reason. So let's go back to your conversation of I can only be as great as my willingness to expose myself to what I've called my darkness. And then the other element of what I found is everything that we've defined as our darkness is actually a refraction of our light. In other words, we call it darkness because of judgment. We call it darkness because, oh, if I do this, it will mean this. But these are all programs that we've learned. It functions like a prismatic prison, if you will, where these, if you could imagine being in a cell of all these different prisms, what comes in is rather than the white light of awareness, let's say, or rather than the direct experience and energetic awareness, it gets fractured and reflected and refracted. So by the time it gets to us, it's a jumbled mess. And the only thing we can hope to do to create clarity is to try to take it all and judge it into one thing. And our point of view tends to become, I'll either receive it or I'll reject it and avoid it. And that's what sticks us.
When you say it sticks us, you mean we start believing these thoughts that aren't true, and we don't progress, we don't increase our capacity, we don't have any even understanding. Maybe we have the desire, but we're stuck even with the desire there. Did I hear you correctly?
Absolutely. And that right there is, for the seekers of the world, the people that are listening to this or watching this, that right there is one of the most detrimental aspects. I have the desire, but I don't have the way of navigating out of this morass into something that is the lightness, the joy, the connection, the whatever you want to call it, that I know should be possible.
It's interesting you said the word should, and I want to push back, but respectfully, whenever I hear the word should, whenever I hear the word should, it always compresses me. And I find myself saying it here and there. I'm not perfect. And newsflash, maybe Dr. Dain isn't perfect either, right? You've done a lot of work, but this human experience that we live, the way we articulate, the way we understand through word, gosh, man, there's so many things that just cannot be fully understood by word. They have to be felt. And so when I heard you say that word should, it brought that up in me. Like, okay, what do you mean I should? So what did you mean by that when you said should?
Well, I'm so glad you brought it up, because this is exactly how we create our lives, is with words like that create a thing. And for me, that's basically, if you want to call it a habit, because the way that I phrased it for so long was, I know this should be possible. Yes. And in actuality, what's really going on, and one of the things that can really help is if you try on if you notice something like this, like should, for example, try on two different versions. Like, okay, what would be greater than that? And so for me, if I say, I know, if we know what should be possible, or if we know what actually is possible that we're not yet choosing. Mm-hmm. And for me, there's so much more lightness in we know what is possible. But one of the things that I've also learned to do is to do my best to speak to what people can hear from the place they are. And a lot of us are in that should mentality, and especially in that area of possibilities, where a lot of people, and one of the things I love about this work around the world called Access Consciousness is people go from knowing it should be possible to knowing it is possible. And then that's one element of it. And then the next part is, okay, then what's it going to take to create it? And that's what we have the tools for, so many tools, like over 8,000 tools. But it's
8,000 tools.
Oh yeah, we actually have more than that. I say 8,000 because saying more than that makes you sound like you're a lunatic. But yeah,
metaphysical and emotional and consciousness tools all wrapped in one tool belt.
Yeah, and a 3-day class. Like I just facilitated a 3-day class called what I call the energetic synthesis of being. Now I call it that partially because nobody knows what the heck that means, so they can't really have much of a projection or expectation. So we can go wherever everybody's willing to go. But the transformation that occurs in a 3-day access class is unlike anything I've ever experienced. And it's partially the tools, but it's partially the concept, which is not that this reality is all there is, and not that resisting this reality will get you beyond this reality, but not resisting it, embracing all of it, which is where all the fun stuff is, like ice cream and money and nice cars and nice people and, wonderful bodily experiences. Those are all in this reality. And we've been taught for years, you need to reject it. It's like, no, you just need to not be owned by it. So there's that. But then it's like, what really is the beauty of access consciousness is this beyond reality perspective that we have, that consciousness gives you. And we don't claim to have a corner on consciousness, because that would definitely not be consciousness. Okay. But we do have a definition of it, which is where everything exists and nothing is judged.
Just letting that land for a moment. And nothing is judged. So if nothing is judged in that space of consciousness, which is beautiful, I really, it was very peaceful. Like my whole nervous system felt peace when you said that. So I understand. I know that space because it comes into my life more on the regular now than ever. Of course, there's moments where it doesn't. But in that space, I wonder, from curiosity, how can we be in that space and not be in fear of it being gone, not be in fear of losing it? I think we've all gone to, maybe satsangs or, workshops. I mean, it's been 20 years of me seeking for the truth.
Yeah.
And I felt this wave of knowingness that you're sharing, that I can feel, that I know. And then I also paradoxically fall into the trap of being afraid that will be gone, or being in fear and reaction that knowingness will be gone. How do you deal with that personally? And how do you teach from love in that space?
I can understand and relate to that one very well. And what I've realized is it's a matter of being willing to be present. So let me try to put some perspective on that perspective, which is when we're being that space. So if we can recognize that our being is lightness embodied, let's say, okay, our being, which is why what's true for you as the being always makes you lighter, and a lie always makes you heavier. And we live in a world in which we've been taught that the heaviness and twistedness of a lie is something we must address because it has so much angsty, twisted energy to it. But in actuality, we need to acknowledge that's a lie so we can get back to the lightness of us. So in this case, the idea that you could lose it, number one, is a lie. But here's one of the other things that I am very interested in facilitation, but also my own personal journey, which is saying something like that, it's a lie. Well, that helps. I can know that in this moment, but then, okay, cool. Now what? What do I, it's a lie. Now what? And that is where the rubber actually meets the road. So in a practical way, we need to recognize that when we get to that lightness, and, it's so interesting because as you're speaking, I'm receiving, when you talk about going to a particular event or experiencing something that's so beautiful and you're like, oh my God, I might lose this. Well, let's acknowledge first that exuberant, it's almost like all of your molecules are vibrating and enlightening, getting more alive and lighter, and you have a sense of not needing to separate. You look at your relationships differently. You look at that person that's so close to you and you're like, oh my God, I care for you even more than I thought I did. You have a sense of everything is okay. Well, what we need to acknowledge first is that's our very being. What we've just been gifted and glimpsed is an awareness of us as we actually are. And no one can take that away. Now, having said that, then let's look at what's after that. Because when we have that, the world we live in tells us that if you get someplace happy, you better hold on to it and solidify it. And guess what that does? It kills it. Because that space is meant to move into greater space. That consciousness is meant to become greater, because consciousness is like a shark. It never stops moving. And so when we artificially try to put a box around it so we can have it, so we can hold it, so we can define it, so we can understand it, so we can repeat it, we're doing it like, my precious. And what happens in that, rather than acknowledging this is an experience of my being and asking a question, how does it get any better than this? What else is possible I've never considered? How many more, what are the infinite possibilities here? How much more fun can I have? How much more joy? How much more consciousness and how much more me? Instead, what we do, because a question always opens up a door to another possibility or universe of possibilities we've never seen. Our conclusion that I have to hold on to it or I'm going to lose it, this is where the judge, and that's actually a judgment. Any decision, any judgment, any conclusion you come to means nothing that doesn't match that can come into your world. We have so much power that when we choose to judge, we go, this is what's going on. And so now we've just created, without realizing it, a reality in which and we could have many versions of points of view here, but I'll just give one. I need to hold on to this, otherwise it's going to go away. Guess what happened? It's already going away, because your point of view is I need to structure it to so it doesn't go away. But the very thing you are experiencing is the destructuring that is allowing you to perceive your being.
So we're holding on to it, and it's the attachment, much like the observer effect. If we watch particles go through a board, and there's a really great documentary called What the Bleep Do We Know? And they mentioned the observer effect. If you start looking at particles, then those particles will change. So what I heard from you is when we're in this space of joy, when we're feeling this beauty, this increased capacity, this love, you go to the question set of, well, how can something come here that I didn't even know? How can I make this more fun? You had said. And in my mind, interesting, I said my mind. In my mind and in my heart, there's a space between the two. And the curiosity comes from that place with my next question. So this isn't just an intellectual question I want to ask you. It's a really heart-based question. It is in this sometimes brutal, sometimes it feels like we're getting a beating of the law of non-attachment that allows us and affords us to actually be here. You know, your last name is Heer. So to be here, we must learn, a lot of times through pain. I wish it wasn't the case, but it is sometimes, most times. The pain teacher comes, it teaches us a lesson about non-attachment. And it's the same exact thing. Do you believe it's the same exact thing as the law of non-attachment, the rule of non-attachment, and also the observer effect, right? That's why I'm saying my question for you is both intellectual and from my heart space. Is it about learning how to not be attached that affords us capacities and things that'll come to us that we can never even imagine?
Definitely. And we live in a world that has taught us from day one that our job is to control everything around us, which is why we function as we do as a species on this planet. You know, that we have dominion over all, rather than what might the universe, which as far as we've been told is infinite, what might it know that we don't, that we can receive? And if I actually am part of that universe, am I really as much of this reality as I have been pretending? And do I really need to control everything for it to work? Or if I gave up control, what else might be possible? We have a process we suggest people run. We have these verbal processes in Access, and we have this thing called a clearing statement. And the verbal process is about bringing up an energy or asking a question about what would be possible. And then we run the clearing statement to undo the limitations that don't allow that to show up in your world. And it's an interesting thing. So one of the processes we run is what would happen if you were out of control, definition, limitation, form, structure, significance, and linearity. And then everything that doesn't allow that, destroy and uncreate it. In other words, let it go. You don't have to hold on to this structure anymore. And then right and wrong, good and bad, pod and pock, all nine, shorts, boys, pobeds, and beyonds, which is probably beyond the scope of our conversation today to explain it. But if we can refer to quantum physics that tells us, like you were saying, the observer effect, the thing is, what we don't realize is every single point of view we have that we have taken not as an observer, but as a structure of our reality, as in other words, in our point of view, creating it as our reality is creating all of the reality we currently have and all the limitations we currently have. And so to the extent that we can let them go, and you realize that our point of view creates our reality doesn't create our point of view. And what you do with this clearing statement, there's POC and POD in the middle that stands for going back to the point of creation of the thoughts, feelings, and emotions immediately preceding some point of view that you had, whether it was last week or in childhood or 100 billion years ago, doesn't matter. And what you're doing in that, though, is you're undoing the fixed point of view that makes you believe that this is the only choice you have.
POC and POD means what?
Point of creation of the thoughts, feelings, and emotions immediately preceding, like basically all of your makeup of everything that you've been making real right before the moment of going, oh yes, money is a struggle, or oh yes, I can't be loved, and it's far more subtle than that. I'm using big bricks here so people can see the bricks, but it's far more subtle in what we can get to. But it's that moment right before you made that choice, right when you were going to take something that could be this and decide, no, it can only be this, and undo it. It's like the room we're in looks solid, the walls look solid, but science tells us it's 99.999% space. Well, what if the limitations in our life are exactly the same way? We just haven't been able to access it yet.
Well put. I think about this. We just built a new podcast studio here on my land.
Beautiful, by the way.
Oh, thank you so much. I know we were going to do this in person and maybe in the future from a place of total curiosity and joy. Maybe we will. But I think about how challenging it was at times to see my purpose through, to manage the contractors, to, with my eyes closed, believe the reality with my eyes closed, that with my eyes open, it would be that exact same thing. And you know what? Just like you said, it was even better. It was even better, Dain. Like, I could have never dreamed of something this badass. It's so incredible. I'm 44 years old. I've been podcasting now for almost a decade. And when I started, I had no even conception of what was possible, but I kept leaning in. I kept leaning into the verbiage I'll use is my fear. I kept leaning into that spark, that whisper, as the Buddha talks about. That whisper was just kept pulling me forward. And here I am. So now, in alignment with what you've said before, without my judgment of it having to be A or B, without my judgment of it being this way or that way, what else is possible 10 years from now? Oh my God, when I'm 54, what's possible? When I'm 64, like, I want to bring hope and light to people through this conversation. It's so easy to do with you because that emanates from you. I mean, look what the workshop you just had for 3 days. I feel this from you. I feel it in my own heart. For somebody that maybe can't access this, what you and I are describing now, what I've told you about the potentiality of what exists. Is there a starting place for them? How do you lead people on that journey from the starting place of where they are to the concept of feeling and embodying what I'm sharing with you?
Well, so many things and so many. I want to say this without sounding like a commercial. I just want to let people know I've got so many things online that are free resources because it's not just one word or one soundbite. We keep thinking or maybe hoping that one soundbite is going to fix our entire life, but we have to allow ourselves to be embraced more and more and more with a level of caring, with a level of non-wrongness, with a sense and even just a little bit of the awareness that things can change to actually have our hope restored. And so To people out there, let me first say, number one, you are not alone. Okay. And that's why Josh and I do this. Huge part of this is to let you know you're not alone and give you a place to turn to get some nourishment that we all require. Number two, you are not wrong. No matter what you have experienced, no matter what you have done, and no matter what has occurred as your life from childhood till now, I'm going to say this, and I know you may not be yet willing to receive it, but you are not wrong. And if we can start there, and then if you for a moment could get the sense of the way it would be to have all of this lifted off of your shoulders and not try to do the thing. And I'm so glad, Josh, you brought up the thing about when we have space and then we're afraid of losing it. Just don't worry about it. We're just going to do this for a few seconds. Just get the sense of the way it would be to have everything that is stressing you and everyone just shut the F up for a minute. And to know that it's okay, that you don't have to solve the problems of the world. And I know some of your parents and relationships, and you have businesses and you have lives and you think you're the sole source, but what if you could let the universe in to contribute? Now we're going to use that clearing statement. Everything that doesn't allow it, will you let it go now, please? We're going to use the short form, pock and pot all that crap. Okay. And what I'd like you to do for a moment is just breathe in, and wherever you have a sense that there is a sense of benevolence. For some people, it's the universe. For some people, they like to bring it in from up, down, inside out. From some people, they like to bring it up from the earth. For some people, it's everywhere. For some people, they're not even sure they can have it, and that's okay too. But if there were a source of benevolence for you, where would it come from? And everything that doesn't allow you to let it in, and everything that doesn't allow you to know that you are not only okay, but that you are actually a gift, and that we live in a reality in which most people's job seems to be to destroy the genuine gift. And it is not your fault. It is not their fault. And there is something totally different available now. Everything that doesn't allow you to perceive that, to know that, to receive that, and to eventually be that and recognize that even if it takes a few years, if you start in that direction now and make that request, it can occur, and it will occur if you make that demand. And if you don't, could be you're here 5 years from now in a similar place, but you don't have to be. You can change this. And everything that doesn't allow that, right and wrong, good and bad, pod and pock, all nine shorts, boys, povads, and beyond.
I love this phrase, poved. Poved means, and you'll have to forgive me because these terms are new for me. Poved. Absolutely. What does that mean?
I love the things you pick up on that are the thing. It's so good. When two people are hanging out together and just aware for what is. So those are the points of view that we're avoiding and defending.
Got it.
And if any of us could take stock of those points of view we're avoiding and defending and realize that one of the things we realize is that combo of avoiding and defending creates so many of the areas of the stuck that won't get unstuck for most people. So it's part of the clearing statement because we want it to be part of everything that we clear. And you can go to theclearingstatement.com. It's free. There's a video of me explaining the clearing statement, me and my friend Simone Milicis explaining the clearing statement. And it's our gift to you. Please use it.
Thank you for that. Gosh, sometimes you had said earlier that we think we're going to get healing from a single statement, or we think our life can transform from a single statement, which, gosh, I'll tell you, I don't know if it's Bob Proctor or Tony Robbins or Dr. Dain Heer or any of these people that do actually speak out, because I believe words are spells. I think our unconscious mind is always listening all the time to everything that I'm saying and you're saying. And when I believe something to be true, there are times, and I maybe you felt this way, please share, where you might hear the same adage or you might hear the same platitude 100 times. And on the 101st time, depending on your spiritual journey, your level of consciousness, when you hear that phrase, that sentence, for the 101st time, something just clicks. Have you had this experience? I'm not saying that one phrase is the golden ticket for anyone, but we receive a message that we've received so many times before. And for whatever reason, which is what my curiosity and question to you is, for whatever reason, all of a sudden it sticks. Have you had this experience?
Oh, so many times. And it's interesting to have had it so many times myself, but also with people who come to classes where I've seen them sometimes for years, and I'll say the same thing that they asked me about 5 years ago, because the same energy and the same thing is there, and the same response is there, and they go, "Oh, I'm hearing you now." And so you get it when you get it. You get it when you get it, and not until you're ready to get it. But if you look at that, if we go to quantum physics, the slit experiment, the double slit experiment, what you realize is, until we're willing to open up to that being our reality, we can't receive it because we're not willing to be it yet. And one of the things is, if we could stop making ourselves wrong for not being there yet, wherever there is. By the way, there is no there. If you're really on this journey, which is one of the things we alluded to earlier, when you get to a sense of amazing space and amazing awesomeness, well, you're going to make that greater if you're actually on this journey. So don't try to hold it into that box, and don't try to put those conditions on it that if it feels different tomorrow, then I'm losing it. One of the other things I found, and this is all with working with people, like most of the things that I found are pretty much all from working with people and seeing what was going on for them that I hadn't seen before. But one of the things about this is, when you open up to a new space of your being, the consciousness of you, the being of you, is like, hell yeah, this is awesome. And what I found is, over the course of a couple of days, you actually become that. That becomes your new normal, if you will. But when it becomes our new normal, we're so used to, we're used to the journey of, I have a problem, I'm walking through my problem, I've resolved my problem, I have lightness, yay. But what happens is, we're so quick as beings that what happens is, as soon as you get to a new space, your being is like, that's us, awesome, thanks, now what? But not from a frantic hunt, but from an acknowledgement of, this is great. And if you truly are an infinite being, you have barely gotten out of the starting gate, no matter how far you are. I tell people, I'm like, if consciousness is an encyclopedia with 1,000 volumes, I am midway through volume 1. And joyfully gratefully so. It means there's so much more available. But if we can recognize that we don't have to structure it, because what is going to occur within a couple of days is we're actually going to become that, which is weird for people to recognize, but then it doesn't feel different than us anymore. Because you can't feel what you are. And I know people put a lot of stock in feelings, and from my sense, it's a great step in the direction of more awareness to go based on how you feel than only using what you think. We're getting more from here to here. And yet what I found is, the way most people define their feelings as good or bad ends up becoming almost as much of a limitation that it doesn't have to be. Which is why I try to reference it to, is it contracted or is it light? Because contracted is not your being. You're doing mental, you're doing significance of feelings or sticking something, and light is your being. There's no thought, feeling, or emotion involved. There's just perceiving, knowing, being, and receiving.
How many people on earth do you believe are truly enlightened? Truly enlightened beings?
Well, I would like to go for conscious, if we might reframe the conversation, because we talk about enlightened as though these are people who've walked a path that has allowed them to become superior to the rest of us. And therefore,
sure, that doesn't resonate with me. Yeah. Not
Gotcha.
Not enlightenment from superiority. Enlightenment like potentially a Muji or the good side or the bright side of the Dalai Lama or some of your teachers who maybe you've sat with a guru. And I don't mean from an egoic place. I mean someone who truly emits, maybe they're vibrating at 5, 6, 700 on the Hawkins scale. I mean, they're way high up there. They're not perfect. They're still human, but they've done so much deep work to be a source of light, enlightened to others. I've heard from a mentor, Paul Chek, that it may be 0.5% or 0.25% or 1/1,000,000th of 1%. My question for you from curiosity was, if you had to guess, is it an incredibly small amount of people? And if so, why?
Oh, dynamically incredibly small. I would say on the order of, let's just say between 10 and 30,000, I would say. Now, once again, this is just my point of view.
Sure.
And
sure.
Once again, what I would say is people who are truly conscious, which, like you said, is a very similar description to what you said. And the primary difference is they don't function from judgment, which gives them this light, this way of being that, as we know, can influence others and influence matter and all kinds of other things.
The reason I asked you, I don't know if you've seen the documentary Wild Wild Country. Did you have a chance to see that? Okay.
No.
You probably don't watch too much Netflix or television.
No, I love it.
Okay.
Oh no, wait, I think I may have.
The one with Osho, the Osho
yeah.
documentary.
Yeah, I watched that one.
The reason I ask you that is because I don't get a stance from you that you have it all figured out. I get an embodiment from you that you're much further along than the students that you teach. It doesn't mean that you're better or you're more superior. It just means that you're on the path of enlightenment yourself and you're doing your best to be honest about things. I mentioned to you before we hit record that you're able to go to emotional places and cry in ways that a lot of spiritual teachers and leaders, I've never seen them access. Like I've never seen many spiritual teachers go to the depths that you go. And in Wild Wild Country, what was so prevalent to me is that Osho, yes, was on a path of being a very enlightened being, but he also had sex addiction and shopping addiction and created a cult that ended up imploding on itself. I mean, it's a very slippery slope, which leads to my question. The slippery slope that I think you are on, that you may not have to agree with, by the way, I don't want to put you in a pigeonhole, a slippery slope that any teacher at your level could be on would be external validation and having your audience or your students praise you in a way that if you're not careful, your limbic system would become so saturated with praise that it may get to your head in a way. Have you considered this on your journey of being a teacher?
Oh, absolutely. And it showed up differently for me than, well, I guess it shows up differently for each of us, but I mean, but the way it would show up for me was I used to be so dynamically in judgment that I had not delivered enough that would create I guess I'd say the lightness or the consciousness, if you will, but the lightness that I knew was possible. Which, if you look at that, that's a total judgment. In that moment, I'm not walking my talk. I'm judging me. Well, self-judgment is not only still judgment, it's one of the most dynamic forms that we do, right? And so that's been a thing for so many years. And what has morphed, I'd say probably in just the last few years, where I've been okay and here's the other interesting part that I want to say for actually a lot of people out there are a lot of things that we will do from our caring that I don't even know how to say it. It's like, it's not what I now know caring to be, because caring is actually when you're in allowance of someone's choice, even if that choice is to suffer, to diminish themselves, to not choose everything they can, to go out with that abusive person again. We can be there for them, but we've got to get over the idea that it's my choice what they choose. And we got to get over the idea that it's up to me what they choose. And in that position, one of the things that I looked at a while ago, because of course I've been accused of being a cult leader, and I'm doing it all for the sex, and I'm doing it all for the money and all that sort of stuff. And it reminds me of when I was being beaten as a little kid by this circle of women standing over me. And I'm like, I'm not whatever you think I am, and what I realized in this is because and if you look at Osho, it's like what people think is, or what people have attached to so much of this is, if this person is in this position and blah, 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 then it means this. But what they're not looking at is, what is the person's actual target? What is their motivation? And so Osho had some great things. And I've seen this so many times. I've seen this with people in every modality and spiritual anything and anything that I've done, where somebody will have an amazing capacity in one area. And as a result of that, people assume that they're everything that this thing has to offer. And Osho had some amazing energetic capacities. And he was also a gaslighting fuck of magnitude. But also, but here's the element of this that I think is so beautiful and also a bit interesting, is that anybody who is truly there for the consciousness would use it for more awareness. Osho said, I must do this. And what they would do is, and yes, there were a lot of people that were followers, and the whole cult thing, I mean, take something that could have been so beautiful and just twist it into the worst of this reality. And that's what ended up happening. And we could look at a lot of whys and such, and that would be a discussion for another time. But what I realize is, in having been accused of being a cult leader and these sorts of things, I'm like, nobody's in that. The people are trying to say, they're not looking at what our actual target is, which is actually empowering people. And all you have to do is be in a class with us once, and you're like, oh, they're actually about empowering. And, who, and it's another thing to say that about yourself. Hey, I'm here to empower people. But I just want you to know genuinely where I'm coming from. And when you realize that, there's no need to defend. And there's also a recognition, like I could see if I had a different target, if it were about me and validating all the things of this reality, and if I needed all that, if that were my goal, well, then it could turn into that. But it's never been my goal. From the time I was tiny, I didn't even want to get back at the people that were abusing me. I was like, why can't we all just get along,
What do you mean there was a circle of women that were beating you? If you're open to going there, I mean, I ask that with respect. What do you mean by that? Because when I see it, it doesn't even make sense to me why that would occur. Like how something like that can happen. I know very heinous things happen in this world, which will lead to our next question. That's the burning question for me that I'm really curious for you to answer. But your story about being in the circle, what was that all about?
So my mom and I were living in the ghetto. My mom happens to be gay. She was living with a gaslighting, abusive, highly abusive, like possessed, abusive sort of woman who at various times would come at me. And this was from the time I was like 3 till 8 years old. And she would come at me, literally, she was going to kill me. My mom would pick me up and take me into the car, and we would drive, and we would park in a parking lot and sleep there that night because we didn't have any money to go anywhere else, which also, by the way, was why we were in the ghetto. And because my dad gave her no money when they got divorced, blah, blah, stories. We all have stories. And so this particular story was, I don't even know what I had done, but what happened was she and a bunch of her friends stripped me naked and lied me down, and they literally were hitting me with belts on my little naked body. And
why?
Well, see, you think there has to be a why for the insanity of this world because they could. Who knows the why? See, if we're looking for why, we're not going to understand 99% of what goes on in this world. Let's acknowledge that it occurs, and then what else is possible? And I'm not, believe me, I'm not trying to belittle this at all. But I also want to point this out because obviously this is not just a conversation you and I are having. This is a conversation heard by a lot of people. So I want to say that when one of our challenges is we try to look for the why in the meanness, in the judgment, in the insanity. There is no why that makes sense. Now, all of psychology will tell you it's because of this, especially your parents, and it's because of this. Well, if those whys were true, I would be a gaslighting hater of women, but I'm not. I would be an abuser, but I'm not. Why? Because that's what people choose based on the experiences they have. They do have other choices. They can look for those other choices. And by the way, if you've experienced abuse, I want to say this to you. If you have experienced it, I know how it is to live with the secrets of that, the wrongness of that, and thinking you must somehow be wrong, and that's why it occurred. And I want to tell you something, that it did not occur because you were wrong. More likely, and look at this and see if it makes you lighter, more likely it occurred because you have a level of power that intimidated powerless people. And if they could get power over you, then they felt like they finally had some. And also, a lot of people who experience abuse actually have an innate capacity for healing it and changing it in people energetically. And they will put themselves in abusive situations. Like one lady I worked with who was beaten and abused by her dad, and we were working in class and she was really stuck with it, had been her whole life, and she was 35. And I asked her a question because I just, be with somebody, look into their world. I said, let me ask you a question. Because she had a younger sister. I said, did you taking the abuse make sure your little sister didn't get it? And she went, oh my God, yes. I thought I was so wrong, but now I recognize what's actually going on. And so, for a lot of people listening, this may be pushing buttons, and I'm sorry, not sorry in that sense, because if these buttons are being pushed, maybe it's time for something different, and different is actually available. And the other thing about that is what all of this is predicated on, and I need to emphasize this, is not my point of view, not what I'm trying to say went on for somebody, me asking a question of somebody and them going from the contraction into lightness. That's how all of this works. And that's why, it's so different, because I have not been a part of anything where they actually did this consistently, where they would ask questions and let people come to their own awareness, but recognize that when they get to the lightness of what's true, and these are some beyond reality concepts, that you did it, that you're not a victim to it, because this reality loves victims and it loves to put you in a victim box. And if you go there, you'll be stuck for the rest of your damn life. And it's a bit of a frustrating thing. Yes, these things occurred, but what is the power underneath it that is so unfathomable that nobody else is even discussing it, which is pretty much all the conversations we have in Access Consciousness classes. All the stuff that is so unfathomable that nobody else is talking about it, because the story of is more important rather than the freedom from that you get from acknowledging the potency of you.
I really appreciate how you said it's not necessarily about getting to the concrete of the why. That's not the more important question. And then the better question is, what is the gift in this? What is the gift in the pain? It's funny. I was just, so shout out to Christina, my massage therapist. I just had a massage this morning and she shared with me some very personal things. And I said, well, that's what makes you such a great healer. That's what makes you such a wonderful therapist. That's why I will always go to you for as long as I can, because you have your finger on the pulse of your own pain, and it allows you to serve from that wound. And one concept that I've been utterly fascinated by, we're going a different direction, but I promise I'll bring it back. It's really fun to talk with you, because this is why I podcast, just the curiosity that keeps unfolding and unfolding and unfolding. I had a guest on the show, and his name was John Wineland. And he lost his daughter to, I believe it was sickle cell anemia, and she was in her 20s, and it was just incredibly tragic. And I said, well, what did you take from that? What do you bring to the world from that? He said, well, the wound is where you serve from. The wound is actually where you serve from. And my question to you is, what is the work that gets to be done so that our wisdom is not clouded by our wounding?
Great question. And in one respect, that of course has so many levels. And what it really is about, as far from my perspective, it's about recognizing that the wounding did not occur because we were weak and wrong. The wounding occurred, and it is an acknowledgement that we are strong. And I don't say that lightly. A lot of people speak in platitudes. The difficulty is, unless we have, a podcast of itself to unpack it, I have to speak that way, but enough to try to give people the awareness that there's something totally different possible. We go so far to say as everything is the opposite of what it appears to be, and nothing is the opposite of what it appears to be. And what we're looking at always, and the way we came up with our awareness of abuse was by Gary Douglas, the founder of Access. He founded it, 10 years before I came along. I've been co-creating it for the last 24 years. And, we have thousands of facilitators around the world that contribute to that co-creation. And well, the way we got to this perspective on abuse was by working with me in the abuse I'd experienced. And what happened was he went initially from the psychological point of view of, okay, it's wrong, you're a victim. And yet nothing got lighter, nothing got more expansive, nothing put a smile on my face at all. I just felt like I kept getting buried deeper and deeper in concrete every time he would ask me a question that was about the wrongness and the blah. And finally, one day he asked me a question. He went, is there some power underneath this that you haven't acknowledged? I went, yes. I was like, hell yeah, brother. Now we're on the right track. And I was like, because that was so non-cognitive, right? And so everything is the opposite of what it appears to be. But what we've learned is that when you get to the lightness, even if it's what you don't expect, you get a sense of lightness, you get a smile on your face, you laugh. And even something that seems like the worst thing you could experience, when you get to whatever is going on, and once again, this takes many layers. So it's not like you just go and it's one thing and it's like, oh yeah, we're all happy now. No, it's as you're getting to that which actually is true. And not truth, not this is my truth, which people use as a dagger. When somebody says, absolutely, I need to tell you my truth, run.
I'm just speaking my truth. It's your fault if you get offended. Yeah. I mean, that is the worst thing. That's the darker side of spiritual narcissism.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That right there. So this is not that. This is when you get to what's actually true. You start to get a sense of this lightness, even in what seems like the darkest of universes. And that's what we've been following. That's why we have all these tools to change things that very few people do, because, and I don't say that as an invalidation of anybody else. I truly don't mean it that way. I just want to let people know there are so many things that we have walked a path with people to get to the awarenesses of what creates it and facilitate them in changing it, that then oftentimes it applies to somebody else and applies to somebody else. And the things that we have as part of the Access classes, we make sure apply to at least 85% of the people. And this is how we've gotten everywhere, is by question from day one.
And it's not just one question, it's a series of questions. Oh. I got to get you and Dr. John D. Martini at a table. I mean, I don't know if you've ever rubbed shoulders with Dr. John at all. Are you familiar with his work?
Oh, I'm absolutely familiar. Well, it's interesting. I loved it. Puts a smile on my face, because when I was a chiropractor and nobody else around me was talking about anything about consciousness at all, a friend gave me a VHS tape that he had. That's how long ago I was at chiropractic school.
I'm glad it wasn't a beta. Remember Betamax?
Totally. Exactly. Oh yeah. A friend of mine gave me that, and I used to watch it. And I used to watch it with a couple of my friends, and we'd be like, okay, there is hope. Yeah. And and I have met him a couple of times, and we haven't really had the chance to sit down and have much of a conversation, but yeah.
The reason I say that is because one thing that I've learned from him and absorbed in our audience has just been so profoundly impacted by it's something to which you speak. And it was, if you want to improve the quality of your life, then you have to improve the quality of your questions. And the quality of your questions will dictate the quality of your life. So it's this formulation of the question, and where my questions come from. Not all the time. I'm not perfect, for sure. Sometimes I'm totally in my head. I mean, it happens. And sometimes I'm really in my heart. It's this space that Hawkins talks about, just between the head and the heart. And for some of us, it can be miles apart, but it's, what is it? I don't know, a foot or a foot and a half. It's that if I can, my voice box is resonating in my body, which is mainly water, and it's between my intellect and my heart, my chakra, my heart chakra, my ananda. And so if I can actually, with my presence with you, with my intention with this podcast, with my beingness, if I can really speak my voice between my head and my heart, I think that's where the juice is. I think that's where the curiosity is. I think that's where the great questions come from, not just from my head when I'm trying to intellectualize access consciousness, or so deeply in my heart that the head can just be completely shut off. And then I open myself up to answers that may not be mine. How do you feel about this?
Well, I would say if you're willing to include your head and your heart and your throat and your crown and your solar plexus and all of the sexualness and the potency and the power, plus the connection with the earth, there you go. And what we, even in our search for something greater, we perhaps of necessity, given the world as it has been, have gone hard and head. So let me say absolutely yes to what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And what if it's even bigger than we've been allowing it to be? And what if even in this, we've been trying to do an either or, which is still a polarized reality rather than a oneness of all of it? What if we included, rather than just, is it my head or my heart? If we're functioning from, say, a chakra-centered perspective, then what if we were like, what about all of them? What does my power center know? What does my gut tell me? What is my, it's not just head or heart. It's we as beings, if, you, I'm sure, have the sense, concept, heard of, we're infinite beings, right?
Of course.
Well, so infinite means we're the entire friggin' universe. Well, okay, that's too big for our minds to comprehend. We can believe we can access it more from our heart, but but an infinite being also has an infinite amount of power. It's not just the receiving and loving, caring there, but the caring plus the power plus the awareness that we have from our connection with everything. Now that is some next level stuff, but it's us. Without, and I hope I don't sound like too much of a dick here, because I don't mean to invalidate anything you're saying. I want to acknowledge it, and also, how do we expand it? How do we physically actualize and live as beyond this reality creatures? Because everything we're doing of trying to go even head or heart is a this reality point of view. It's a polarized point of view. It's this is better than this, or hey, if I can include these two, yeah, well, that's two out of how many others that we could include, but we're not even thinking that way, which is why access is so different, because it's like, it's like, but not also from, because prior to access, I did some things that were like, this is mind expanding. And I was like, it is, but it's also not inclusive of everything. It's the significance of how your mind is expanding rather than the presence that the space of your being has when you, meaning us, when we allow it to be the oneness it actually is, and function from that, not from, oh, I've got to be oneness today, but from the space that allows us to perceive and receive and be everything else from.
Yeah, definitely. I feel what you're saying, and I'm not trying to be a dick either.
I feel what you're saying. What you want to say is, I feel what you're saying, but.
Well, I feel what you're saying, and so I can see radical truth in what you're saying, radical truth. And yes, and on top of that, I think that the level of advancement in which you speak from and operate from is not the goal, but it's definitely, I would say you're further along than most. You're way further along than most. And so my my goal, even with that question to you, was, the space between the head and the heart. It was really coming from a place of how can we make spirituality and personal awareness of the all, how can we make that practical for people? And I think my question stems from my own getting caught up in my head, or even my own being so in my heart at the wrong plant medicine ceremony that I allowed myself unconsciously to be taken advantage of. And so it's not that I want to, the question doesn't come from a bifurcation or a separation of the head and the heart, that it only has to be those two. But I think it's really important to speak to the mind and the heart of someone that maybe is at war with those parts of self, right? Because that's the starting place for most people. They have anxiety or depression, and then they begin the path. They're dealing with trauma. They're dealing with energies inside of them, Dain, that they don't understand, that are causing them so much pain. And that's how they start the path. So that was actually the emanation of the question. And I can like I said, I can 100% feel the sincerity and the realness, that it's much bigger than just head and heart. But I really feel like practically, if someone's just beginning their journey, gosh, maybe start by marrying the two and then expand from there.
Well, that's one way. And once again, to not be a dick, but if you look at this very conversation, do you have a point of view about the way it should be? And also, do I? And if we can have a conversation like that, then there's nothing we can't address. There's nothing we can't change together. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. And in this, it's like, and I will acknowledge exactly what you're saying. It's like, what I'm talking about is like, what the actual F? What are you
It's an expanded consciousness conversation that you've embodied through word.
Well, it's not just that I'm embodying. What I've found is, if I'll be that, see, if we don't, even somebody who's starting on this journey, I get what it is to start on the journey. I was starting on the journey at one point, but I was also treated a lot of times with kid gloves, like I was an idiot because I was starting on this journey, and I will not invalidate people that way. So what I'm willing to do, because what I realize is people change by being inspired by people who are being something they desire. I am rhyming a lot today. It's very bizarre. But people change by being inspired by the sense that it is possible that somebody else presents, amongst other things. Mm-hmm. But that's one of the biggest, especially in this area where somebody is suffering. What I've realized is, if we're willing to be that, and whatever words we put around it are just the words we put around it, but if we're willing to be that and be that as an invitation to people, then even somebody starting out their spiritual journey is like, if he can be it, I can be it. And so for me, I'm not willing to turn it down in the face of anyone. I created something called International Being You Day. And as part of that, we had all these hours of people playing and being and all this sort of stuff. It was really awesome, all around the world. And as part of that, I presented a class, and it was like 90 minutes. By the way, that's also free and freely available online too. And one of the concepts that I talked about in there is something called personalities, which is it was a bit of an in-depth conversation that we were having in classes. And here were bunches of people who've never heard of me, never heard of Access, coming to this for the first time. And as I'm going through, doing my best to follow the energy and create value, create change for people, this concept comes up in my head to talk about. And initially I was like, brand new people? No. And about 3 minutes later, I'm bringing out this concept. And I had a lady who'd never done Access before send me an email and going, this is what I needed. I had been wanting to leave the planet. And as soon as I heard you, my universe just went pop. And as you started going into this personality conversation, I realized I'm ready more than ever to create. I just didn't have the venue for it. And I was like, cool. And what I found is, and I want to also acknowledge that I completely concur with what you're saying about give people as easy a place as possible to start, and simultaneously don't limit anything that they can choose to be right now if they're willing to choose it. And I'm not saying you are. I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah, it almost feels, well, to me, I'll speak from the I. It feels to me like a paradox. And even in a paradox is a paradox. It's almost like when you put two mirrors together and like in a fun house and they go, brrr, it's like nothing but mirrors.
Uh-huh.
So how would anyone who is at your level or at any level really teach someone, like if they don't have to be a black belt to teach a white belt is what I'm saying. They could be a purple belt or any color. A white belt is somebody who's tired of feeling anxiety and depression and pain. How would one, because you mentioned this earlier, which I loved, how would a coach or a teacher of any kind bring someone who's a beginner or a white belt into the space of personal growth and development and not have to treat them with kid gloves, but also paradoxically still give them an easier starting place so they don't get overwhelmed?
Yeah, that is a wonderful question. And I want to say something because you've mentioned my level and other people's levels. And from my perspective, I also, speaking from the I, it's a space that I'm willing to be, not a level as such as, and I think it's an interesting thing where I'm picking up what you're putting down, you're picking up what I'm putting down, and we have these slight, perhaps, ways in which that if we can add our perspective to it might, I think in this venue especially, if given the nature of the conversation we're having, it's like, I'll say something and you'll give a perspective, add to it. And I think, and I'll do the same. And my sense is what it does is it opens it up more to what more people can experience and more people can receive.
Sure.
So I just want to know that you and I know we're not, going against each other on this at all. So that we have that freedom.
This is actually, can I speak to this? Because you're touching on something that's here. One of the things in my life that I had been up until about a week ago, and actually today definitely came through, was just this fear that I had noticed in myself around having my articulation be received. Fear of rejection, fear of public speaking. I mean, a podcaster with like almost 10 years under his belt, still popping up, right? Still popping up. And so my questions to you come from this place of finally just fucking being Josh and just actually authentically asking you the questions that I've been so dying to ask my guest, because I've been in fear of challenging my guests out of respect to them because I'm here to spotlight them. But I'm here to spotlight us together, exploring the mission that you are being the messenger for. That's what this is all about. So that's I think what's in the space. That's what you're feeling. That's what we're feeling. It's part of my own development that I'm living out publicly. So I think that, to put the finger on the pulse, is what you're sensing.
And that right there, the willingness to put the finger on the pulse publicly, like you said, I'm living it out publicly. Yeah. That right there, that, you asked, how am I able to, or it's not an ability, it's just something I don't refuse, that crying and, when that comes up, because like we were talking about before, I would not dishonor those that are receiving it by artificially putting up a wall. It's like, what am I here to do? I wrote a book called Being You, Changing the World. If I'm not walking my talk, that has no value. Yeah. And you are. Yeah. And I'm just fucking grateful. Thank you.
Same. Yeah. So I don't feel, I actually think that, what's a good way to say this? I think that sometimes tension, for lack of a better term, is healthy, because we really don't know each other unless there's some healthy conflict, right? And by conflict, I just mean we're aligning to each other's point of view with the sole joined purpose of, in your case, accessing consciousness or growing my consciousness, growing my understanding of what it is you have to bring to the world, so that I can most lovingly, most curiously ask you questions that I want to know personally, selfishly, and then also that I feel my audience wants to know too. And so from that place is where the questions come from. And I forgot where we even were before, because I had to say, but I believe the direction we were going was, as you're guiding people and as you're teaching people, if somebody is a white belt, how we can hold both of these worlds, Dain, of not treating them with kid gloves and also giving them a practical starting place when they're beginning their journey?
For me, it's recognizing they're an infinite being. Like, one corollary for me is, like, there are a lot of parents who talk to their kids like they're children. They'll do baby talk at them, and they'll act like somehow when they turn 18 and can either vote or hit puberty, or they have some random standard when they actually become a being. But no, the babies are infinite beings with small bodies. Talk to them like an aware creature. And that's the exact same thing I do with people who come to my classes. And I don't try to sugarcoat it, and I also, there's a lot of aspects that go into this, but one is you can't tell somebody something they're not willing to hear. And so you don't try to get somebody to look at something they're not willing to. Instead, and the whole thing is, I'll ask them a question. Like, hey, what is this for you? And there will be certain times where somebody will say something and I'll go, okay, is it this or this or this? Like, I'll give them the choices as they come into my head. And I tell them at the very beginning, I'm like, look, you know far more about your life and your world than I do. Do not trust me, trust you. If you trust you, your entire future is going to be greater. If you trust me, you're going to eventually have to knock me off the pedestal. Can we just save both of ourselves the trouble? At least I start with that. And of course, people are conditioned to that, but at least they have the information at the beginning. And that truly is my point of view. It's like, we have within us all the awareness we require if somebody would just ask us the questions that will allow us to get to our awareness. So it's also part of why I brought up that conversation about not levels, but space, because a space that somebody's willing to be, we inherently know that it's possible for us to be it too. When there's an interesting, I'm trying to think of, I know the way that I've said it, but I was reading something that was relating to quantum physics where they said it, but I can't remember it. So let me say the way I say it, which is, when you open up a new space of being or possibility, like a new way of being with something, you give everybody else on the planet permission to have it too, because we're all connected in this quantum field. And quantum entanglements, however you want to look at it, consciousness, we have so many descriptions for that. But in that, what I recognize is that person that has the vulnerability and the courage to go, I've been doing this my whole life. I'm done. I'm choosing something different. When they make that choice, it's a contribution to me. So as a facilitator, I'm not the friggin' guru. I'm the facilitator. And facilitating means I'm empowering you to be as great as you can, but I'm also receiving as you do it and recognizing that we truly are all interconnected. And this class thing that we're doing, or the facilitation, is a microcosm of the macrocosm that is actually, we are all part of creating this world. And as this person's world expands, there's more space for all of us. And that's what I'm there to facilitate. Plus, have a lot of friggin' fun as we're doing it.
Which probably is the barometer you spoke about. When it's the truth, it feels light. Yeah. And when it's a lie, it feels heavy. So you're walking your truth. I want to go back to something you said earlier and I've felt this a lot and I've seen this a lot in, I guess you could say, the world of personal development, for lack of a better term. And it is when someone says something extremely harsh or aggressive, and right after it, they say, well, I'm just sharing my truth. I want to go into that a little deeper with you, because I think that is a part of spiritual narcissism that gets to have light shined on it. Have you seen this, and how do you yourself, not why, because I'm inspired by your question. It's that we don't have to get to the why, but what is it here? As to what purpose does it serve that somebody would become spiritually narcissistic and share their truth in the most brutal way? As to what purpose is that?
Well, I don't know if we can, when you say what purpose, what perspective are you asking from?
How does this serve us all on the journey of becoming fully conscious? Oh,
some people are assholes. There you go. And now, notice when I say that, I know there's a certain number of people who are listening and went, oh, that was easy. Okay, cool. See,
it's pretty light.
Yeah, right. Exactly. What's true makes you lighter. Oh, they're so good. So some people are assholes, so we acknowledge that. But the thing about this is, so here's this person, I must tell you my truth. I've had people say that to me and I'm like, no. And I literally walk away, or I'll say no. And they go, what do you mean? I'm like, that's nothing to do with what's true. It's your judgments that you now feel justified in skewering me with. And I'm not interested in you just sitting there railing your judgments at me. That gets us nowhere. You want to actually have a conversation, ask me some questions, maybe talk about this and go to what creates lightness. That's fine. But otherwise, I'm not interested. Go find somebody else to skewer with your judgments. And and that's not from, once again, that's not even from a superior point of view. It's from an acknowledgement of, I have enough caring for me to where I don't need to eat your shit to prove it. And so I don't need to eat your shit to prove I care for you. If and judgment is shit. It is. It always is. And so you don't have to take that. Now, and then the interesting thing, if you look at the person who wanted to deliver their truth, that response will often put them into question, because unfortunately, the spiritual community has the idea that if somebody says they want to tell you their truth, and you have to sit there and listen. No, you don't. No, you don't. What's going to create more consciousness? What's going to create more awareness in the world? What's going to create more lightness and more possibilities? Let's go for that. Yeah. Rather than validating someone else's need to offload their judgments and make you wrong in the process. And so the difficulty is that person who is, I need to tell you my truth. Once again, the whole thing about this is we're all different. There's different reasons why people would do that. And for one person, it's going to be they've been disempowered their entire lives. They see you as something you did wrong, as they see you as you did the wrong thing, but also you're not going to retaliate against them. So you're an outlet where they can do this and know that you won't hurt them back. So this is the perfect scenario, except you might be the only kind person in their life, which is who they tend to like to do it to, because they know they're not going to they're not going to get the retaliation. Okay. So you can see somebody like that. And here's the other, oh man, it makes me cry, because there's so many different possibilities that we don't realize, because we're so busy resisting and reacting to things, or aligning and agreeing with the things. And what we talk about in Access is allowance, where everything is an interesting point of view. Interesting point of view. I have this point of view. And if you'll do that when somebody is coming at you to tell you their truth, interesting point of view, I have this point of view. Interesting point of view, I have this point of view. And the energy shifts. Interesting point of view, I have this point of view. Usually what will happen is you'll have no walls and no barriers, and they'll have nothing to fight against, and it takes the air out of their sails. But what was making me cry was could you imagine somebody comes at you like that, right? And you don't have anything to prove. You're being, and you have no walls and no barriers. And like, I need to tell you my truth. And you are such a space of caring, because that's how you like to be, because you're being you, where you're just like, hey, what's going on? What can I actually be for you? What do you actually need to tell me? And have you ever been hurt before? What if I can just listen to you about what's underneath that and what's going on? So we don't have to create this thing together anymore. Like, and I've done that with people, and it's like, it's being that space for somebody, being that caring for you and them, being that, whatever that is world changing. And people can melt because they know you're actually there for them, and anything they bring up is okay, and they're not going to be judged, but you're also not going to buy it, which will create the separation between you. That's us.
The samurai is what I was visualizing and feeling when you were speaking. The samurai is not on Earth for purely war. I think about Commander Mark Devine, a Navy SEAL, one of the most awakened beings I know, yet he spent so much of his life in war. And I loved what you said about point of view, because as people access consciousness, which is your gift, as people expand their consciousness, the points of view shift. So if along the journey I meet you, or I meet anyone, and I can just accept that they have a point of view, first of all, without trying to shit all over it, then like you said, you're right. It's like the shields and the swords come down.
Yeah.
And that's such a more beautiful, fun place than not even accepting that someone else has a point of view. This is why the majority of the time with my team, with my woman, with my life, I do my very best to genuinely, and I say genuinely because that's maybe the hardest part. I genuinely listen, and I genuinely do my very best to just accept that someone else has a different point of view than mine. And I get caught up in language at times. I went pretty deep into NLP and understanding that, gosh, we are just this meat robot and our brain is a meat radio. But to transcend that, to access consciousness, then we become the master of the flesh. We become the master of the mind. That's fucking exciting. That's exciting. I mean, that's where the juice is, right? Like, so it's been a wonderful conversation. This thing's flown by. It's definitely flown by. What do you think we missed? You know, when we talk about accessing consciousness and your mission of access consciousness, what did we miss? What else needs to be said?
I don't think we have. There's only one other thing that I would like to say is if you can get the sense of the way it would be, and you might say the feeling or however you get it, and of the way it would be to have the life and living you desire in the area of money, creation, relationships, intimate relationships, living space, and get the sense of having total ease with money, total ease with your relationships, actually enjoying your life. Whatever you do in the world, it changes all the time so that you're not bored. You have the sense of being the contribution to people that you can be. And life starts to show up with ease and joy. And just get the sense of that. And wherever you feel it or sense it, maybe pull some energy into it so you can get it vibrating and alive, and then connect with it. And let little trickles go out to everyone and everything who's going to help make it a reality for you that you don't even know yet. And it's a real simple, real quick way of tapping into beyond the mental of, oh, if I were actually living and feeling into my life that I desire and having that, then what would it be? And that's a way of anything that feels like that energy, do it. And do it also for the future, for a world that you would like. And realize that you, on a very real note, and science will back this up in many studies, right? On a very real note, the choices that you make contribute to our future as a world. The choices I make, the choices we all make. It's not significant. It's just an acknowledgement. The more lightness you choose, the more lightness that you will have as your life, but the more lightness we'll all have access to, and the way more fun.
Really enjoyed the connection today. This is what podcasting is all about. So thank you for being you. And all of your books are linked at the website right now we have on the screen. Where are you the most active? You know, where can people connect with you? We're in this world of tech. Long form conversations like this are medicine for people's soul, because if you're like us, then you believe that liberation is a pathway that sometimes can be challenging, but it doesn't have to be. There can be more light. There can be this choice point where we have more light. Where are you the most active online that people can go and connect with you the most?
DrDainHeer.com. It's DrDainheer. There's a lot of resources there. And also, you know, the usual suspects. I've got over, 900 videos on YouTube with different tools. Lots of them on Facebook, Insta. So yeah, please connect and let yourself know this journey can actually start to be fun, and you can have it from a place that is your terms and the lightness for you.
I shared, I didn't say it yet. I'll say it as we say goodbye. I shared a very similar question as you when we were both young, and I'm 44. What is your biological age? You may not feel 54. That way, but 50. Okay. So you're 10 years, you're 10 years, 10 years ahead. And so in your decade of wisdom, if we were to both trace our lines back to childhood, I used to feel this question for as long as I can remember, one of the first questions I ever felt, how do I live my life well? When I was a little kid, how do I live my life well? What's up with all these adults? What are they doing? They're just like hurting each other, like what?
Yep.
And so it's a similar question that you asked, but now how do you answer it? At 54, how do you live your life well? What is wellness to you? How would you define well-being?
Looking in the mirror and actually admiring the person that's looking back at me, and having a sense that I'm being the contribution to the people in the world and our planet's future that I would like to be. Hoping that doesn't sound too significant, but I don't care, because it's actually what is actually true for me. But also for me, it's being willing to honor and take care of myself and my body, and acknowledge that it's not just about giving all the time. There's got to be a lot of receiving also, and the willingness to have that in all of its forms, and actually to be grateful for it, and to be grateful for also the gifting and the giving that I get to do. And so really, if it's too simple to boil it down to one word, gratitude, but if I can be grateful for all of it, that for me is a huge step toward living well.
Well, thanks for being here. I know it's a cool alliteration with your last name. I think that's not a coincidence that your last name is Heer, because I really felt like you've been here the whole time. It's awesome. I think that's a gift to everyone that's been with us. So until I see you again, until we all connect with you again, we're both wishing you love and wellness. We'll talk to you soon.